61. Dumbledore's plan. Professor McGonagall watched Fred and George go, then sighed softly. Those two boys. Headmaster Dumbledore, may I take Mr. Vizette back now? Penelope Clearwater asked tentatively. To have an incident like this without any points deducted felt like the best possible outcome. I'm afraid not, Miss Clearwater. Dumbledore waved a hand. There are still some things I want to ask Mr. Lovegood privately. Professor Flitwick, would you mind taking him to the headmaster's office? The password is jelly slugs. As the others drifted away, Dumbledore turned to Quirrell. Professor Quirrell, I couldn't find you a moment ago. Where did you go? Ah, just woke up, Quirrell stammered, sweat beading on his brow. I left, then later I heard a commotion and came to see. Is that so? Dumbledore murmured, then looked at Snape. Severus, I thought I saw you with him? Quirrell drew a shuddering breath, worried, and glanced at Snape. Snape pursed his lips and answered coldly, Coincidence. Yes, coincidence, Quirrell repeated, finally letting out a long breath. I was a bit confused when I woke, but I'm much better now. Good. If Professor Quirrell is well, then everyone may disperse and get some rest, Dumbledore said, nodding. The professors left one by one until only Dumbledore remained in the Great Hall. He strolled to a corridor where the floor was a mess of scattered bricks and stones, evidence of the troll's rampage. Trace reveal, he whispered. Golden smoke streamed from his wand, coalescing into a vortex that rustled and scattered countless glints of light. The specks gathered, forming moving figures that reenacted the night's events like a film. Dumbledore, settled like a moviegoer, produced a bag of lemon sherbets and watched, eating with quiet relish. Magic fireworks, he mused. Fred and George's skills have improved, perhaps with Mr. Vizette's help? Is this the special summoning charm Minerva mentioned? Fascinating. Understanding the troll's weaknesses, an extremely skilled levitation charm, and there seems to be an extra surge of magical power. Is this the nature of the Obscurus? The Obscurus power could rival some Death Eaters. Dumbledore set the lemon sherbet away carefully. His expression went very serious. So that's what Lord Voldemort is after. You mean his goal is the Obscurus? Snape's voice came from the corridor. He limped toward Dumbledore. A flicker of guilt crossed Dumbledore's face at Snape's injury. You're not in good shape. Shall I have Fawkes? No need. Snape refused stiffly. You told us Quirrell is the Dark Lord's subordinate. We should minimize contact. Phoenix tears can heal, but if his wounds mend too quickly, it could make him more dangerous later. As Dumbledore said gently. I'm sorry. Dumbledore sighed. Your leg, was it from fighting Quirrell? His strength is considerable. I was bitten by Cerberus, Snape interrupted. You never told me there was a Cerberus in that room. Why would something like that be kept anywhere other than the Forbidden Forest? I did mention it, at the welcome feast, Dumbledore explained. I set protective enchantments in the room and used the door as a marker. Fluffy only moves about inside and only comes out to harm if the door is opened. I did not expect anyone would actually go inside. Quirrell's disguise and silent casting had been adept. Snape's tone stayed icily controlled as he said, Quirrell disguised himself very well. His silent casting is skilled, and he destroyed the door with fire. A lucky accident I didn't anticipate. Dumbledore sighed. He is a talented wizard in his own right. What a pity. He has a talent for needlessly endangering himself for the Dark Lord, Snape said without mercy. What exactly did you say Voldemort's goal was? To make Mr. Vizette cast dark arts and thereby agitate the Obscurus, Dumbledore answered. Lord Voldemort wants the Obscurus power. A look of recollection passed over his face before it hardened. He intends to seize that power. Is this Voldemort's plan or Quirrell's? Snape asked. Dumbledore frowned. What else happened between you and Quirrell tonight? He heard Vizette's voice and immediately grew tense, Snape said. He even begged me. He exposed his back to me and ran downstairs as if his life depended on it. Is that why you appeared together? Dumbledore's brow smoothed, and he stroked his long silver beard. That could be fortunate. Wanting Vizette's power while also showing care for him, how is that fortunate? Snape crossed his arms. He should be at St. Mungo's getting his head examined. Perhaps his soul has already split. One part cares for Vizette, the other is bent on carrying out orders, Dumbledore mused. I could brew a potion to ease his misery, but contradiction can be an opportunity. Under Vizette's influence, Quirrell might be turned back. You still must keep contact with him and try to learn how Lord Voldemort is faring. That information is vital, Snape said. Heh, otherwise? Snape sneered. That's why I don't use Phoenix Tears. I'll go find him again tonight. Dumbledore regarded him with sincerity. Severus, thank you. No need. Snape's voice was tight. As long as I can kill the Dark Lord, I'll do whatever it takes. Dumbledore laughed, self-deprecatingly. It's been a while since I sighed so often. Let us continue watching. Shall I assist? Snape said nothing, but his frown and 2 steps forward were answer enough. They returned to the Great Hall and watched the golden specks form Mr. Vizette, who radiated an oddly distorted aura. Dumbledore murmured, "The Obscurus is restless. That's not a good sign." He studied the replay thoughtfully. By the time I calmed Harry and came back, Mr. Vizette had already returned to normal. How did he manage it? The trace gave him the answer. Vizette, recreated in golden light, waved his wand and cast a spell on himself. Snape's expression shifted at that familiar movement. A compound charm improvised in front of me. The incantation was, "Dust away." The wand traced a graceful S-shaped arc. A vortex of air rose from the floor and whisked a cloud of dust away, clearing the scene with a single sweeping motion. Snape explained, "The effect is exactly as you saw. It will remove all kinds of stains, even dragon's blood." Dumbledore murmured, "When was it completed? Was it under your direction?" "No." Snape shook his head. "The idea for the compound magic came from Quirrell, although his teaching is worse than a despair potion. But when he taught Vizette one-on-one, he showed the sort of intellectual level a Ravenclaw should. His theoretical grounding is solid. He's only a first year." Dumbledore cried. "To invent a compound spell at that age, that's remarkable." Snape cut him off abruptly. "Don't change the subject. There's no way I'm making time for Harry Potter." Dumbledore waved a helpless hand and chuckled. "Don't worry." He found the compound magic wasn't complicated, merely very clever, combining the strengths of 2 types of charm. Intrigued, he copied Snape's hand movements and easily reproduced the effect. He closed his eyes to experience the magic again, but he still couldn't understand why such a domestic charm could suppress an Obscurus. He did know someone with a deeper understanding of the Obscurus and planned to write to that person later for advice. Snape, impatient, asked, "Since the Dark Lord is targeting Vizette, will you tell him about this?" Dumbledore reflected aloud, "I'm thinking about it. How much I should tell him." "Concealing things is your usual method. No surprise there," Snape sneered. "My suggestion is, tell him everything." "You actually trust him that much?" Dumbledore sounded surprised. "That's unexpected." Snape pursed his lips, said nothing more, and limped away. "Vizette, take this." In the corridor, Flitwick slipped a large bag of Honeyduke's best chocolate into Vizette's hand. Eat up, he urged. "You missed the Halloween feast. You must be starving. Have some chocolate to tide you over." Ravenclaws loved their head of house not only because Charms was relaxed and enjoyable, but because Flitwick had a warm, generous nature. He always seemed to carry snacks, and when he found a student in low spirits, he'd hand over a bag of sweets and a few encouraging words. According to Penelope, if you were feeling down and went to Flitwick's office, you might catch him waving his wand and making the pastries perform a little square dance just to cheer you up. Honeyduke's best chocolate lived up to its name, far better than a chocolate frog, smoother, softer, and richer. After 2 pieces, Vizette felt a pleasant warmth spreading through body and mind. Flitwick guided him around a corner to a corridor dominated by a huge gargoyle statue. It crouched on a stone pedestal with spread wings and a ferocious expression, so lifelike Vizette could almost imagine it moving. Flitwick called, "Password, sherbet lemon." The statue seemed to come alive. It stretched, folded back its bat-like wings, and nimbly stepped aside to reveal a bright passage with a spiral staircase rising inside. Riding the spiral felt oddly familiar to Vizette, like the moving staircases of his previous life, steady, smooth, and best of all, he didn't have to climb. Because of Flitwick's popularity and the practical appeal of Charms, he had more students asking for help than anyone else. While they rode the staircase, Vizette took the chance to pepper him with questions about Charms. Just as Vizette expected, none of the professors were simple. Each was full of knowledge and more than willing to answer his doubts. Gestures, the tone of the incantation, and a relaxed mind. Keep those 3 points in mind when practicing magic, and you'll get twice the result for half the effort, Flitwick said, slipping into teacher mode as his eyebrows danced. Beginners especially must remember them. Gestures and tone influence the final effect. A good foundation makes learning advanced techniques much easier. Advanced techniques? Vizette blinked. Could you give an example, Dean? Wandless casting and nonverbal casting are examples. Flitwick lifted 3 long fingers. I'll give a simple demonstration. He snapped, and a clear spring of water gushed from his fingertips. Then, with a light flick of the other hand, the water froze instantly into a delicate ice flower. Flitwick handed it to Vizette with a smile. Aqua eructo and glacius, here performed through nonverbal and wandless casting. As the name suggests, nonverbal casting means producing the effect without saying the incantation aloud, Flitwick explained. Vizette pulled out his notebook and started writing. Simply not speaking the words aloud was harder than it sounded. From all he'd seen, intonation mattered for giving a spell the power it needed. There's nothing wrong with writing it down, but a solid foundation is the most important thing, Flitwick said, pleased. I have confidence in you. Your tone and pronunciation are excellent. What Flitwick admired most was Vizette's combination of strong fundamentals and eagerness to learn. If you pass your OLs, by 6th year, I'll start you practicing this technique. Can wandless casting be learned in 6th year? Vizette asked. Flitwick shook his head. Hogwarts doesn't teach wandless casting. Wizards in Europe adopted wands very early, so developing wandless skill here is much harder. Without a wand, spells are less precise and accidents are more likely. I've heard that some African wizards are quite skilled at it, though. The staircase deposited them in a corridor, ending with an intricately carved wooden door. Vizette pocketed his notebook, satisfied. Learning is endless, Flitwick said kindly, but you must relax sometimes. That's why I had you join the Quidditch team, so you can balance work and rest. 63. Meet Phoenix Fawkes again. Behind the wooden door lay a spacious circular room, its walls hung with portraits. The paintings were enchanted and alive, but since it was late, they all dozed, their frames gently shifting as they slept. Flitwick lowered his voice as they entered. These are the headmaster's portraits. Vizette nodded, taking the room in. Several desks stood clustered here. Those along the walls were cluttered with silver instruments that spun or hopped and puffed faint wisps of smoke. 2 rows of curved cabinets hugged the walls, and one cubby held a battered wizard's hat, the sorting hat used at the sorting ceremony. As Vizette turned to examine everything, a melodious sound came from above. He looked up and saw a large, fiery red bird. It had a swan-like shape, trailing glorious golden tail feathers. Its beak and talons were long and delicately fearsome. This is Headmaster Dumbledore's companion, the Phoenix Fawkes, Flitwick whispered, delighted. A rare magical creature. I saw it in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Vizette said, but it's even more beautiful in person. At his praise, Fawkes trilled softly and hovered down to his level. Try extending your arm. He seems to like you, Flitwick encouraged. Don't worry, you won't be burdened. Phoenixes are very intelligent. Vizette obeyed, lifting his arm as if summoning a hawk. Fawkes immediately settled there, bringing not weight, but a comforting warmth. The sensation stirred something familiar in Vizette, a memory of his first arrival in this world. I remember you, he murmured, gentle and almost reverent. Thank you for supporting me. Fawkes trilled again and nudged his cheek. You and Fawkes seem to know each other already. That's wonderful. Flitwick beamed. I'll have someone bring something for you to eat. It will be delivered here shortly. Vizette felt a little embarrassed. That's too much trouble. Flitwick blinked. It's late, and I was thinking of a supper myself. Consider it convenient. Vizette had no idea what Flitwick called a late-night supper, but when the tray appeared on the desk, it was certainly not a modest snack. He found lamb chops, steak, and 3 baked potatoes, more than enough to sate anyone before bed. He couldn't refuse the tempting smell, and soon gave in. He chewed his steak in small bites, and remembering a detail from Fantastic Beasts, fed a few wriggling flobberworms to Fawkes. Phoenixes preferred dew, herbs, and berries, the book said, but Fawkes accepted the treats and raised his graceful head, inviting Vizette to stroke his neck. The feathers there were silk smooth and radiated a deeper warmth. After a while of petting, Vizette felt a real affinity with the bird. It calmed him and let him think clearly about the evening's strange events. As memories surfaced, a shadow passed over his face. Dumbledore's voice cut through the quiet. "It seems you and Fawkes are getting along well." Vizette turned. Dumbledore stood in the doorway to the headmaster's office, a gentle smile already on his face. Time had silvered his beard and hair, but not his energy. His bright blue eyes were still lively. Fawkes fluttered to perch on Dumbledore's arm and tucked his curved beak against the man's cheek. Dumbledore patted the bird, and it flew up again to settle on its stand by the door. He came to the desk and asked softly, "Was your first Halloween at Hogwarts a memorable one?" Vizette nodded. "I plan to write about tonight for Mr. Lovegood." "I am a devoted reader of The Quibbler," Dumbledore said with a twinkle. Noticing Vizette's clouded expression, he reached into his robes and produced, almost as if by magic, a handful of lemon sherbets. "I'll be eagerly awaiting your article." Holding out a sherbet, Dumbledore listened as Vizette hurried to speak. "Headmaster, can I ask what exactly happened tonight?" Dumbledore sighed. "After I appeared, the troll abandoned its original target and focused solely on me. That behavior is highly unusual." Vizette brought up another mystery. "And the runespore attack. There's something odd about that, too. Hagrid told me the snake eggs came from that runespore, but Luna said that runespore was very old. Could it even lay eggs?" "The snake eggs fetched me 500 galleons, which is no small sum," Dumbledore replied. "I want to know what I shouldn't know." Speaking it all at once relieved some of Vizette's tension, and the cloud on his face eased. Dumbledore smiled. "It must feel better to speak your mind." "Yes," Vizette admitted. "That's good," Dumbledore said. "Your experiences have changed you, too much at a young age. I, too, once kept my worries bottled up until I made a very grave mistake." "Grave mistake?" Vizette echoed, puzzled. Dumbledore only nodded and did not elaborate. "Vizette, you should confide more. It will help." Vizette cleared his throat, a little embarrassed. "Life here is wonderful. I just don't understand two things. Precisely because life here is so good, I don't want accidents to ruin it," Dumbledore said. "The simplest, purest, and most profound desire to learn about everything, that is the quality Ravenclaw most admires. Ravenclaw suits you." "Tell me about the runespore incident first," he continued. "That was the work of a pureblood family. I intervened and negotiated, and the result of that negotiation was those snake eggs." He spread his hands with quiet certainty. "The pureblood family will not act again. You can trust that the money is safe." "A pureblood family is targeting you?" Vizette thought of the Slytherin attitude toward him. "Is it because I'm an Obscurial?" "Not entirely," Dumbledore said. "Being an Obscurial isn't just dangerous. It also usually means you come from the Muggle world. Some so-called pureblood families still cling to the idea that bloodlines matter, a comforting absurdity, that wizards should rule over Muggles. To emphasize their supposed uniqueness, they've grown extremely exclusive and hateful of both Muggles and Muggle-born witches and wizards. They've forgotten that purebloods are becoming rarer. Even within the wizarding community, half-bloods and Muggle-borns are the majority now." Vizette felt a hot sense of irritation. The pureblood theory is ridiculous. "It's very like the racist theories you might have seen in another life," Dumbledore agreed. "Perhaps that's why Slytherin held such a grudge against the other houses. In any case, their extremism produced its own disaster. From that madness, Lord Voldemort was born." Vizette's eyebrows shot up. "Lord Voldemort was a product of the pureblood families." "The connections are complicated." Dumbledore's expression grew grave. "Voldemort's upbringing was unusual, and it warped him into a believer in pureblood supremacy. When he rose, the pureblood families realized they could use him to preserve their privileges. Their interests aligned, and they joined him. He became he who must not be named, and they became the Death Eaters. The wizarding world fell into darkness until Harry Potter defeated Voldemort and peace returned. But now I must tell you this. Voldemort has come back, and he isn't only after Harry Potter, he's after you as well." Vizette's eyelids fluttered. "After me?" Dumbledore nodded. "Yes, the troll was acting on his orders." Vizette frowned, thinking fast. "Is it because I'm an Obscurial?" "You're very perceptive," Dumbledore said approvingly. He had noticed that Vizette, upon hearing Voldemort's return, did not panic, but immediately began to think, an uncommon steadiness that Dumbledore valued. In Vizette, he saw traces of many people, Ariana, himself, and others. Since Vizette had not betrayed Snape's trust, Dumbledore decided to tell him more. His voice became serious. "I need you to be prepared for something." Vizette matched his solemnity. "I am." It was only after I had dealings with Quirrell that I became convinced Voldemort had returned. In other words, this action very likely involves Quirrell. "Quirrell?" Vizette's eyes widened. "Professor Quirrell?" Dumbledore smiled sadly. "People can go astray. It happens to many. I have watched Quirrell since he returned from holiday. He's become increasingly withdrawn and odd. I feared he was beyond saving, ready to plunge into the abyss, until a turning point appeared." Vizette pointed at himself. "The turning point is me?" "Of course," Dumbledore said, smiling. "You and he are both Ravenclaws. It's a curious coincidence." Vizette still looked uncertain. If Quirrell was working for Voldemort, why would he teach me? Dumbledore's face grew thoughtful. "It was from him that I learned dark magic can awaken the evil thoughts of an Obscurus. He also recommended mastering occlumency to combat those thoughts. There's a contradiction there." "That contradiction is the turning point," Dumbledore continued softly. "You may not have noticed, but your words and actions are different. You treat every professor with the same respect and sincerity. That kind of earnestness is exactly what Quirrell has always yearned for but could not easily accept. He went down the wrong path, and your sincerity unsettled him. It might be the key to turning him back." Vizette frowned, questions still forming. "What should I do?" "Keep that respect and sincerity," Dumbledore said slowly. "For a sensitive person, special treatment can feel like a threat. Act as if you know nothing. Influence him subtly. Continue attending Quirrell's private lessons if you can, or at least don't show distrust openly. Above all, be careful. Watch your own safety." At that moment, Fawkes trilled softly, flew down from his perch, and landed beside Vizette. Dumbledore stroked the phoenix's feathers. "I haven't forgotten you," he said. "If you ever face danger, call for Fawkes, and it will come to your aid." Fawkes seemed to nod with almost human understanding, plucked a fiery feather, and let it float into Vizette's palm before vanishing. Vizette looked around. There was nothing visible, only the warmth in his hand. He felt, somehow, that a connection had been made, thinking of Fawkes would summon a response. "Fawkes is fond of you," Dumbledore explained. "That feather is its mark. As long as you remain at school, it can find you quickly." "We still have time," Dumbledore added. "Think it over. If you run into any trouble, come to me. Professor Flitwick knows the password here." Vizette stood up, speaking without hesitation and with absolute resolve. "I will keep attending Professor Quirrell's classes and do everything I can to change him." Dumbledore folded his fingers together and said softly, "Good." He bowed his head slightly, hiding his eyes. When he did lift his face, there was an extra, clear moisture in those pale blue eyes, an emotion he would not show outright. 65. Snape's purpose. After Vizette left the headmaster's office, the room felt a little empty. Dumbledore drew his wand and traced a perfect circle in the air. Expecto Patronum! A dazzling silver light shot from the tip of his wand, resolving into a living phoenix that hovered for a moment. "Newt, how have you been? One of my students has invented a spell. The incantation is Dust Begone. Yes, a very efficient, practical, everyday charm. I vaguely recall you mentioned there might be an Obscurus contained there. I wonder, could it help suppress an Obscurus? Reply as soon as you can. Give my best to Tina." He flicked his wand. The silver phoenix spun once and vanished into the distance in the blink of an eye. Dumbledore closed his hand, let out a long sigh, and the weariness showed behind his eyes. "I must go find him again," he murmured. Quirrell's office. Snape rose and looked down at Quirinus Quirrell. "Quirinus Quirrell, since you want more time to think, use that thick head of yours and think. Are you sure you can serve the Dark Lord with nothing but your power? Compared to you, Quirrell snapped, feigning indifference. "Professor Snape, I really don't know any Dark Lord." "Very good." Snape curled his lip and tossed a parting barb as he walked away. "I'll come find you again." The door slammed behind him. Quirrell sagged to the floor, drained, then suddenly bolted upright, clutching his head and letting out a pained howl. He cast a quick sealing charm to keep the sound in, tore the cloth bandage from his head, and the pale, sinister face of Lord Voldemort swam into the mirror. Voldemort spoke calmly. "You did well. Snape is not reliable. Good thing you didn't tell him about me." "But I don't understand," Quirrell panted, the tearing in his skull easing. "He knows a lot about you, eh? Isn't he a Death Eater?" "He is a traitor," Voldemort growled. Quirrell's cry burst out again, as fresh pain lanced through his head until he nearly fainted. Voldemort sneered, amusement in his voice. "Your ignorance amuses me, Quirinus. Even now, the truly loyal servants are mostly in Azkaban. Only those like Snape, who made excuses to clear their names, have been able to live freely for 10 years, a full 10 years. They are all traitors. Of course they'd want to come to me and atone when they hear I have achieved immortality," the voice continued. "Was it not with your help that I advanced my nonverbal casting? Help me obtain the Philosopher's Stone, and I will reward you further." Quirrell trembled. "So he knows what I did tonight. He knows I don't need your reminders, Quirinus. I know everything about you," Voldemort interrupted, cold and impatient. Regret washed across Quirrell's face. "I feel." Voldemort's expression was almost satisfied. "You never deceived me. Haven't you mastered the dark arts I taught you? And the Obscurial? This time it was the curse of withering that saved him. Continue to teach him. Teach him more dark arts, understand?" Quirrell hesitated, then stammered. "But," a low hum from Voldemort. Yes, my master." Quirrell's voice echoed hollowly in the office like something from a deep well. Voldemort's laugh rose, drowning out the single, small sound. "I'll be watching from behind. You must remember that. I'm displeased with you tonight. How dare you stop the Obscurus's rampage? And just now, you didn't really want to be a good professor, did you? That's pathetic." "Then endure it." Voldemort's laughter grew manic. "Endure my wrath." Quirrell clutched his head again. Black and green lights braided through his mind. His screams were swallowed by the pain. His body shook convulsively as the torment took him. Only his trembling figure betrayed the endless suffering within. "When silent, you master my true name. When spoken, I cease to exist." Before the bronze door of the Ravenclaw common room, Vizette pondered the knocker's riddle. He had been here 2 months, and the knocker never failed to ask a new, clever question. "Silence," he decided. "If you are silent, you are silence. Say the word, and it is no longer silent." Excellent answer. The eagle knocker spread its bronze wings, and the door swung open. It was already past midnight, and Vizette hadn't expected so many people to still be awake in the common room. His footsteps drew a string of relieved faces. Arsenal, the team captain, stood up. "You're finally back. Glad to see you're all right." His teammates and other Ravenclaw Quidditch players clustered around. "Thank goodness you're back." Cho Chang patted her chest. Penelope closed her revision notes and told Cho, "Didn't I say nothing would happen?" Roger came over and put an arm around Vizette's shoulders. "A first year fighting a troll. That's straight out of a Lockhart book." Anthony leaned forward eagerly. "That's an X-level dangerous creature. Come on, recount it. How did you defeat it?" People pressed in. "Yeah, Fred and George are arguing, but we still believe you." "I remember a troll's weak point is its head. If it were me, I'd aim a stupefy there. Trolls resist a lot of magic. Are you sure a stupefy would stun it? They're so tall, hard to hit." "Maybe transfiguration would be better. Something to restrain its limbs at least. Keep yourself safe." "Potions could work. Draught of living death, maybe. Trolls aren't picky. They'd probably swallow anything." The room buzzed with suggestions and laughter as Vizette prepared to tell the story again. 66. Toffees from Luna Ravenclaw students had a strong theoretical foundation and loved playing armchair general, arguing about strategy and debating how they would handle things in real combat. Tonight they did the same, proposing methods for dealing with a troll and letting Vizette judge whose approach was best. In truth, the curse of stagnation had been decisive in the fight. The levitation charm and an ancient magic throwing mastery had also been crucial. Those, however, were Vizette's secrets, and he didn't want to make them public yet. He didn't want to boast either, so he borrowed a few dramatic beats from novels he'd read in his previous life and spun a story about everyone working together to defeat the troll. Halfway through, it sounded more believable. After all, a tale of first years alone defeating a troll would have been too fantastical. The shared victory version satisfied his companions, curiosity, and let Vizette keep his own methods to himself. When he finished, the effort left him drowsy. Penelope and Cho Chang noticed and gently sent everyone off to get some rest so Vizette could slip away to the dormitory. His roommates were exhausted. They said goodnight, collapsed onto their beds without bothering to change into pajamas, and were asleep the moment their heads hit the pillows. Vizette washed, changed into his pajamas, and was just about to lie down when a tapping came at the window. Thor was at the glass, a noticeably bulging letter clutched in his talons. "You've worked hard," Vizette murmured, letting the owl in and warming him in his arms. "You could have rested and come tomorrow." "Coo!" Thor shook his head. He smelled faintly of herbs, the owlery's feed, prepared by Professor Sprout to help birds recover their spirits. The 4 heads of house at Hogwarts were each exceptional in their fields, and the letter was exactly what Vizette suspected. Luna and Xenophilius's Halloween greetings. Thor, sensing Vizette's return, had delivered it without delay. Inside the envelope were greetings and a small separate packet marked with a little drawn smiley. "In the candy, there's a little surprise Dad left for you." The bag of handmade sweets was the reason the envelope was so bulky. Vizette peeled back the oil paper and found glossy toffees shaped like dirigible plums, owls, and blibbering humdingers. Luna had added delicate painted details, and the candies looked almost alive. He popped a blibbering humdinger into his mouth. It melted with a rich mix of milk, vanilla, and caramel, wonderful on the tongue. A few chews later, a different texture hit him, a soft center of gurdy root juice and honey. It was an odd but comforting contrast, like ice cream crossed with the chewy, savory note of a scallion pancake dipped in honey. Vizette knew that gurdy root surprise had Xenophilius's touch. The elder Lovegood loved brewing gurdy root tea. The combination brought memories of home rushing in. He smiled. "This is the taste of home." "Coo?" Thor cooed twice and rubbed against Vizette's neck. Vizette blinked and brought himself back to the present. He tucked Thor under his arm and said softly, "You should rest. It's tiring for you to keep flying back and forth." Thor cocked his head and gently pecked Vizette's hand, indicating he didn't mind. Vizette tried another tack. "Could you come back for the letter tomorrow afternoon? You can rest tonight." "Coo!" Thor accepted the suggestion, flapped his wings, and flew out the window into the night. Vizette put another toffee in his mouth, and this time let it melt slowly. The taste lingered and steadied him as he sat down to write. Perhaps it was the gurdy root center, perhaps the vivid recall of home, but he wasn't sleepy. 2 months at Hogwarts had already changed much. A deeper understanding of magic, mastery of a dangerous curse, and a growing reservoir of ancient magic ability. He could reply to Luna with ease now and decided to tell them a more dramatic version of the night's events. He sketched out a story richer in detail than the truth, drawing on those old novels until he had a solid framework. By the time he finished, the night had given way to dawn. He stood, stretched toward the morning sun, and felt its warmth wash over him. "A new day," he said to himself. It was Friday, and first years had no morning classes, so Vizette allowed himself to sleep late. He woke at noon with sunlight pooling on the blue carpet, making him feel as if he lay among the clouds. At the window, he stared out toward the forbidden forest. Late autumn had left it a dark mass. Perhaps real winter would be required to drape it in silver. On the sill, dirigible plum seedlings had sprouted and were stretching toward the light, thriving under Professor Sprout's guidance. "We took care of them this morning," Anthony said from behind him. His roommates had returned, each carrying oil paper parcels that let out a faint, delicious aroma. Chris set his package down. "We noticed you weren't in the Great Hall, so we brought you some breakfast." Before Vizette could thank them, Michael chimed in. "No need. Didn't you bring us breakfast once when we overslept?" "Oh, what a pity we missed last night's feast," Terry said with a closed-eyed sigh. "That Yorkshire pudding had a special spice to it. I can't forget the taste." Michael grinned and teased, "You love food so much you should go to Hufflepuff." Terry shot back, laughing. "Ha! If you hadn't shown me that Yorkshire pudding, I wouldn't know how good it was." "You're the one fit for Hufflepuff." Anthony summed up with a smirk. "My suggestion is that you both go." Vizette, used to their bickering, picked up a piece of apple pie and sat down at his desk to watch them. When your stomach is empty, sweets have a special pull. 67. Devil's Snare. Leaving the Ravenclaw common room, Vizette noticed something odd. People around him were pointing and whispering. Some walked past and then turned back as if they couldn't quite believe what they'd seen. Anthony fell in beside him, 7 parts envy and 3 parts jealousy in his voice. "You're quite the celebrity now. After all, you beat a troll." "You bet," Michael nodded. "I heard at least 3 versions of the story today, and none of them match what you told us last night." "Several versions?" Vizette asked, puzzled. He was still thinking about his manuscript and wondered if any of those versions might give him inspiration. Michael turned to Chris. "Chris, what did Ron and the others say?" Let me think." Chris scratched his head. "They said the troll was very unusual, much smarter than Flint, and could even throw a wooden club." "Flint," Vizette laughed. As a member of the Ravenclaw Quidditch team, he knew the rival captains from the other houses. Flint led the Slytherin team. Anthony, a seasoned Quidditch fan, immediately understood and also laughed. Gryffindor and Slytherin are always at each other's throats. I've seen Flint a few times. He's a bit short, really a bit trollish. "Are you even listening to me?" Chris complained. Michael hurried to reassure him. "Of course we are. Come on, tell us the rest." With an audience, Chris went on. Vizette used a levitation charm to catch the wooden club, then threw it back, smashing the troll's head. But for some reason the fallen troll came back to life, like an Inferius, and tried to take Vizette down with it. At that critical moment, Vizette used some sort of magic and black smoke came from his body, and he defeated the Inferius troll. Vizette touched his nose. He suspected that Fred and George had spread that version. Only they, as eyewitnesses, would have known so many dramatic details. "Very Gryffindor," Terry commented. "They love single-handedly defeating huge enemies. That's their idea of bravery." When they reached the greenhouse, a cluster of Ravenclaw girls was gathered, chattering and peeking toward the door. They glanced with disappointment each time and then resumed their whispers. The moment Vizette and his friends appeared, the girls fell silent, looking at him with wide, curious eyes and covering their mouths to giggle. Terry nodded toward them. "They came over and asked us about you several times this morning. If Prefect Penelope hadn't stopped them, I swear they would have charged into the dormitory." "Darn it," Michael clenched his fists, looking wounded. "When will I ever be the one they talk about?" "When you get a T on your final," Anthony teased. "If a Ravenclaw gets a T, everyone can use you as an excuse for doing badly." "I support that," Chris said solemnly. "We'll all remember your great achievements forever." The bell rang. Professor Sprout entered the greenhouse, wand in hand, 2 large boxes floating behind her. "Children, class time." One box was ordinary wood, the other was painted a thick, matte black. "Open 1,000 magical herbs and fungi to page 726, she instructed. "Today we'll learn about an extremely dangerous vine, the Devil's Snare. They usually grow in dark, damp places, dense rainforests and misty swamps. Those are their breeding grounds. Remember, you must be very careful with Devil's Snare. It is cunning and can camouflage itself." She tapped the wooden box with her wand, and it opened to reveal a bright green vine, its tendrils wiggling like crab claws. "This is a crab claw plant, a common magical species. It's vigorous and easy to care for. You could forget to water it for a month, and it would be fine." She watered the crab claw plant, and it seemed to dance with renewed vigor. "All right, everyone step back." She clapped to quiet the students. "I will now open the other box. It contains the Devil's Snare." Professor Sprout stepped back 5 meters, motioned the class to stand behind her, and waved her wand. The greenhouse dimmed to twilight. The second box opened. Inside was a plant that at first glance looked almost identical to the crab claw, the same bright green tendrils, the same slow swaying. Sprout waited for the right moment. "That is the Devil's Snare," she warned. "It's disguised as a crab claw. Watch closely." She transformed a scrap of tissue into a small sheepdog and sent it to approach the Devil's Snare. The students leaned forward, breath held in anticipation. Usually Sprout was cheerful in her lessons, but today she was serious, and that seriousness spread through the class. Vizette stood ready, having cast his magic eye and the guardian meditation method to better observe what would happen. With the magic eye, the plant's magic circuits blurred into view. The basic magic eye could only show the circuits of processed magical items clearly. The circuits of living, unprocessed magical plants and creatures remained much more diffuse. The sheepdog padded closer. 12 feet, 11, 10. The students counted silently, measuring the distance to the plant. 5 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet. When the dog was less than a meter away, the scene changed in an instant. The tendrils' bright green deepened into a dark, venomous green. They uncoiled like a mass of angry snakes, intertwining into a black, living net that whipped out and wrapped around the sheepdog. The vines tightened with a terrifying, deliberate pressure, squeezing the dog's body as if strangling and tearing it apart. Then the sheepdog reverted to a scrap of tissue. Professor Sprout raised her wand and whispered, "Lumos." Professor Sprout widened the glow at the tip of her wand, forming as broad a barrier of light as she could. Like a valiant knight, she held up that shield of light and forced the devil's snare back into the dark wooden box. The students still looked stunned. The plant's sudden attack had rattled them. "Children, fortunately the only casualty was a tissue," she said, smiling as she waved the tissue to put them at ease. Once they'd recovered, she cleared her throat and continued the lesson. "Do you see? As I said, the devil's snare is extremely cunning and deadly. It has astonishing constricting power, enough to seriously injure even a troll. Its weakness is obvious, though. Warmth and light will drive it away. You should already know the fire-making spell and the Lumos spell. If you don't, that's fine. We'll practice both now." Vizette was unusually distracted, perhaps the first time he'd ever zoned out in class. He kept replaying what he'd seen earlier, especially the moment the devil's snare revealed its true form. When the sheepdog approached, the blurred magic circuit representing the plant shifted, its structure expanded, and grew more complex. His magic eye wasn't powerful enough yet to see the whole process clearly, but he had a feeling that that change would help him understand transfiguration. After a moment, he poured ancient magic power into his magic eye, trying to push it further. As when he had first activated it, everything around him changed. The world seemed to fracture, cracks opening, spilling out ribbons and blocks of color. Those strands and shapes converged and reformed, arranging into clearer and clearer patterns, networks of lines, interlocking motifs, layers upon layers until the patterns blurred from sheer complexity. Then the greenhouse snapped back into view. The students stood in line, with Professor Sprout acting as instructor while they practiced dealing with Devil's Snare. Vizette exhaled and savored what he'd just seen. The first time his magic eye had given him a broad, macroscopic view of things, now it had shifted toward the microscopic, changing how he perceived the world. The pages of the Wizard Combat Guide had altered as well. Intermediate Magic Eye. Incorporate more elements into your vision. Make their magic circuits distinct and visible. Discover ancient magic power distilled by time. Absorb it to continue the growth of the magic eye. "Vizette, come over here," Michael called. Vizette nodded and fell in line behind him. Michael peered at him. "You've been out of it for a while. Is this because of dealing with that troll last night?" "No," Vizette shook his head. "Maybe I didn't sleep enough. I only got to bed at sunrise." Michael leaned closer. "Why so late? Were you too excited after killing a troll?" "Had to write a reply," Vizette said. "Oh, by the way, do you want some of the toffee Luna sent me?" Michael waved him off, sounding miserable. "No thanks. The soft center's probably sour and stinky." "It's not sour," Vizette corrected. "Onion-flavored. It's the taste of Gordigan, an acquired taste, but pretty good once you get used to it." Chris laughed. "Is that still toffee? Your sister's taste is unique." "It wasn't Luna's idea," Vizette said. "It was Mr. Lovegood's. He wanted to surprise me." "I heard he's hard to get along with," Michael murmured. "Relative of mine mentioned it." Vizette looked serious. "He's an interesting man and very respectable." He meant it. After Luna's mother died, Xenophilius Lovegood raised her alone. They were an ordinary family, and Luna's cheerful, singular outlook came from both her own bright nature and her father's care. Some people use a happy childhood to nourish their whole life. Others spend their life trying to heal their childhood. Xenophilius had done his best, so Luna wouldn't have to spend her life that way. "Don't say any more," Michael said, clutching his chest in mock agony. "I can feel the sour stench getting stronger." Vizette smiled and looked at the Christmas cactus nearby. With the intermediate magic eye, its magic circuits were sharply visible. Compared to the simple glyphs that appeared around potion ingredients, the cactus's circuits were far more complex, interlocking and precise, moving like mechanical gears where one shift affected the whole. That was why the plant moved with such agility. Vizette found himself absorbed in the scene. "Mr. Lovegood, are you ready? Please take out your wand," Professor Sprout called. "Vizette! Vizette!" Michael nudged him. Vizette blinked and apologized. "Sorry, Professor, I drifted off." "You must not have slept well last night," she said with concern. "It was your first time facing such a thrilling situation after all. But cheer up. Under the right circumstances, the devil's snare can be as dangerous as a troll. I want to teach you how to use your wands to protect yourselves and how to remain calm when confronted by it." "Thank you. I'll do my best," Vizette said, gripping his wand. "I'll open the box," she instructed. "You'll have a little more than 10 seconds to react. Don't strain yourself. Use either Lumos or the fire-making spell." She put one hand on the box's handle and held her wand ready with the other. "Are you ready?" "Yes." She opened the box. This time, the devil's snare didn't bother to disguise itself. Its vines were dark green, and Vizette felt a twinge of disappointment. He'd hoped to watch the disguise process again to help him with transfiguration. The plant sensed living things and immediately shot out snake-like vines, lashing at Vizette from every direction. "Lumos." Vizette flicked his wand, and a blinding burst of light erupted like a flashbang. The devil's snare recoiled at once and shrank back into the box, not daring to continue its attack. 69. The Magic Circuit of Devil's Snare and Schlumbergera. As herbology class wound down, the students reluctantly filed out of the greenhouse. Compared to the usual watering, fertilizing, and repotting, practical combat lessons were clearly far more popular. "Vizette, isn't your next class flying?" Professor Sprout hummed a little tune, looked up and asked casually, "Any other questions before you go?" "Professor Sprout, I wanted to ask, how does Devil's Snare disguise itself as a Christmas cactus?" Vizette asked. "You always manage to come up with the most unexpected questions," Professor Sprout said with a smile. "Devil's Snare disguises itself whenever it senses danger or needs to hunt. It can even take on much smaller, more inconspicuous forms, Virginia creeper or ordinary vines, for example, but when it wants to strike quickly, it often assumes the form of a Christmas cactus. After all, they are actually considered the same type of magical plant." "Considered the same type?" Vizette repeated in surprise. "Do you mean like the relationship between wolves and dogs?" "A very good analogy. You're perceptive. You can think of it that way," Professor Sprout praised. "They share a close relationship, much like dogs and wolves." In ancient times, Devil's Snare was an extremely dangerous plant. Venturing into swamps or rainforests meant going in groups and keeping a careful watch. It wasn't until wizards developed more advanced magics that Devil's Snare became less of a threat. Later, some wizards experimented with it, and one result of that tinkering was the Christmas cactus. "It sounds a little contradictory," Vizette muttered, pen poised over his notebook. "How can Devil's Snare imitate a Christmas cactus when Devil's Snare came first?" "The Christmas cactus form is simply one of the disguises Devil's Snare adopts," Professor Sprout explained. "When it's not attacking, the disguise can be quite attractive. Those old wizards must have noticed that, and they fixed that form in cultivation. Don't you think? The Christmas cactus is very pretty." Vizette smiled. He thought Professor Sprout was a lot like Hagrid, deeply fond of magical plants and creatures. Professor Sprout reached into her pocket for her wand. "Even so, Devil's Snare remains dangerous. I'll show you now how it disguises itself as a Christmas cactus." Vizette put away his notebook, released his magic eye, and said, "Thank you, Professor Sprout." "It's my duty to answer students' questions," she said, leading him about 5 meters away before opening the box that held the Devil's Snare. "First, we need to create an environment that makes the plant feel safe." She waved her wand, tracing a path in the air like a blend of a C and a D. Frigid water. A familiar field of magic sprang into being, wrapping the Devil's Snare in cold, damp air. The plant's vines swayed, the dark green of its leaves slowly faded, and before long it had taken on the exact look of a Christmas cactus. Professor Sprout continued, pressing her wand down as she spoke the next incantation in a steady voice. "Unyielding steadfastness." Vizette already knew both spells from his private lessons with Professor Snape. Frigid water was a preservation charm that produced a controlled, cold, humid field to keep materials fresh, like a wizarding refrigerator with temperature and humidity set by the caster. It had taken Vizette 2 full weeks of practice to just begin to master it, and Professor Snape had looked only mildly pleased at his progress. Unyielding steadfastness was the solidification charm, used to temporarily fix a material's state so its magical properties wouldn't leak away, often employed when handling rare potion ingredients. Through his magic eye, Vizette watched the Devil's Snare's magic circuits respond. They contracted, the once jagged lines smoothing out, gradually forming the pattern typical of a Christmas cactus, Schlumbergera. Excited, he grabbed his notebook and sketched the circuits as he saw them, making careful notes. Professor Sprout glanced at the drawings, sweeping, intricate patterns of lines and nodes, but she couldn't make heads or tails of them. Then again, in the magical world, individual understanding varied. It was common for one wizard's insight to be another's mystery. When Vizette finished his first set of notes, he blushed and asked, "Professor, could you make it revert? I'd like to watch it change again." "Of course," Professor Sprout obliged. The specimen in the box became prey again, its green tendrils unfurling as it returned to its true form and shredded the small tissue bait. Vizette returned to his notebook, refining the circuit diagrams and marking subtle differences he hadn't noticed before. Without thinking, he raised his wand and murmured, "Frigid water," helping the plant into its disguised form once more, then continued sketching as the circuits shifted. Seeing him cast the spell so naturally, Professor Sprout looked surprised. "You already know that charm?" Vizette nodded. "Professor Snape taught it to me." Professor Sprout smacked her forehead. "Ah, I forgot. You study with Professor Snape on weekends. No wonder you've picked it up." Herbology and potions often overlapped. She herself routinely took materials to Snape, so she was well aware of the connection. She asked, curious, "That charm requires very precise control. How long did it take you to learn?" 2 weeks, Vizette admitted, a little embarrassed. "Maybe I was too slow." Professor Snape didn't look very pleased when he heard. 2 weeks. Professor Sprout was momentarily lost for words, then patted his shoulder solemnly. "Don't be so hard on yourself. You're already very, very excellent." "I'll keep working hard," Vizette said earnestly. "I've only just begun learning magic. There's so much more to learn." "I'll be going to flying now," he added. "Do you have another class later? I'd like to come back." "The next lesson will also deal with Devil's Snare," Professor Sprout replied with a smile. "Headmaster Dumbledore specifically instructed that everyone should master methods to handle Devil's Snare." Watching Vizette hurry off, Professor Sprout snapped the black wooden box shut. "It only took him 2 weeks," she said, shaking her head with amusement. "Kids these days, no wonder Headmaster Dumbledore thinks so highly of him. And he even managed to humble Snape, quite entertaining," she added with a soft sigh. "It's a pity I missed it. I wonder what Snape's face looked like." By then, Professor McGonagall's request for additional flying brooms had been approved. They were second-hand, but well-maintained, and there hadn't been any repeat of the earlier accidents. Students were making the most of the rare chance to fly. Vizette, meanwhile, had gone back to studying magical circuits. He'd watched the Devil's Snare's camouflage routine so many times that inspiration kept welling up inside him. By the end of flying class, he said goodbye to his roommates and returned straight to the greenhouse. Only Sprout was there, finishing the last of the cleanup before the weekend. Vizette greeted her and, wand in hand, helped sweep. Sprout handed him a cup. "Dittany honey water," she announced with pride. "You won't find this anywhere else, my own recipe." Vizette took a small sip, sweet, but with a bright, restorative tang. "Does it suit you?" Sprout asked. "This year's honey is especially good. Are you still planning to study the Devil's Snare?" He shook his head. "Professor Sprout, I actually wanted to borrow a Christmas cactus. Can I practice spells on it?" "Of course," she said. "As long as you don't use any dark arts, the Christmas cactus is remarkably hardy." "I want to practice transfiguration," he said quickly. "I had some new ideas, and I want to try them out." "No problem." Sprout waved her wand toward a corner, and the black wooden box floated up to them. "You can practice here. I'll put the devil's snare away. Too dangerous to leave out. Close the door for me when you leave." Vizette arranged the pages of notes he'd brought, sketches and diagrams of magic circuits for both the devil's snare and the Christmas cactus, with annotations on how circuits shift from dynamic to static. The theory of metamorphosis and transfiguration he'd been constructing sat ready in his head, a mental reference he could consult at will. He cast his guardian meditation method to sharpen his focus and let the pages hover and follow him as he approached the cactus. The plant sensed him, and its vines swayed gently in a slow rhythm. He let his attention shuttle between the notes and the theory, letting patterns fall into place. He murmured the levitation charm, and the pages turned back and forth like a flipbook. The motion helped him visualize the circuit changes. Light seemed to spark behind his eyes. "So it's like this," he thought. He switched on his magic eye, lifted his wand, and flicked, pointing straight at the still swaying Christmas cactus. Through the magic eye, his magic seeped into the plant and traced its circuits. He shaped that magic into a kind of covering, something like clothes wrapping around the plant's pathways. "Vine shaping," he whispered. He guided the shaped magic to sharpen, to mimic the devil's snare's circuit profile. As he refined the form, the cactus stopped swaying. The bright green of its vines darkened to a deep, bristling green. Its tendrils lengthened and flowed with a serpentine flexibility, coiling and uncurling as if testing new muscles. The cactus reacted as if obeying a command. The dark vines unfurled and surged forward, swarming past the papers and around Vizette, lifting him off the floor. Outside, the sun slid lower. Professors Sprout and McGonagall were walking toward the greenhouse together. Sprout kept glancing anxiously at her colleague. "Minerva, are you sure it was all right to leave the devil's snare here?" "At least Headmaster Dumbledore said we could," McGonagall replied with a small shrug, a trace of helplessness in her tone. "He even asked you to point out its weaknesses to the students." Sprout let out a worried breath. "I still don't feel comfortable. You know who." "This isn't meant as bait for you-know-who," McGonagall interrupted, adjusting her glasses. "Think of it as a sort of end-of-year test, an extra challenge." "If that's the case, the students he's testing have my sympathy," Sprout murmured. "Even an adult wizard would have trouble facing all that at once." "We trust Dumbledore's judgment," McGonagall said firmly. "He's guided Hogwarts through worse." "He has been working himself to bits lately," Sprout said, smiling despite herself. "He's been coming by for my Dittany honey so often, I've only half a jar left." McGonagall laughed. "Sweets are a good stress reliever. He does seem a bit obsessed, though." They both laughed, and Sprout turned to look toward the greenhouse, then screamed, "Oh, Merlin's beard! There's still Devil's Snare in there." "That's impossible. I only brought one, and I took it out," Sprout started. "Vizette?" McGonagall's eyes went to the greenhouse doorway. Through the open door, a mass of writhing green filled their view, tendrils coiling like a pack of snakes as if stalking prey. Without a second thought, she shifted into her tabby form and darted forward. In a few quick bounds, she reached the doorway. The tangle of vines had wrapped itself around a figure and tightened, fingers and branches trying to squeeze the breath from the student within. McGonagall's heart dropped at the sight of a familiar face through a gap in the green. Vizette's. "Incendio!" she yelled. A fiery lion erupted from her wand and leapt toward the devil's snare, growing larger as it charged. The conjured beast crashed into the space where the snare had been and missed. The green mass disintegrated in an instant, its vines collapsing and slumping to the ground. In the sudden quiet, Vizette's voice came from the tangle. "Professor McGonagall! Vizette!" McGonagall inhaled sharply, horror shifting to fierce relief and then to a hard, searching look. What on earth happened just now? Sprout arrived at his side, breathless and anxious. "Minerva, Vizette, are you all right?" 71. The budding understanding of magic. "I was practicing transfiguration," Vizette explained awkwardly. "I happened to observe the devil's snare's camouflage process and suddenly got an idea." Professor McGonagall sounded a little exasperated. "Practicing transfiguration? You have no idea how worried Professor Sprout and I were when we saw a huge mass of devil's snare appear in the greenhouse." "Professor McGonagall, Professor Sprout, I'm very sorry. I should have told you first." Vizette lowered his head. His voice was faint. "That's all right." McGonagall pursed her lips when she noticed how downcast he was. We were just overly concerned. She deliberately changed the subject, not wanting to linger on the scare. You mean you can transform a Christmas cactus into Devil's Snare, is that right? Yes, Vizette nodded eagerly, his eyes bright. I read the theory of transubstantial transfiguration you suggested, then combined it with what I recently observed, and I managed it. He raised his wand and aimed at a Christmas cactus across the room. Vines form. After about 10 seconds, the gently swaying cactus shifted color, its leaves taking on a deep, dark green. They writhed like Devil's Snare and lunged toward Vizette. McGonagall and Sprout moved to draw their wands, but the sight left them stunned. The Devil's Snare coiled at Vizette's feet and formed a platform that lifted him into the air. He held his wand up like an orchestra conductor. Under his command, the vines climbed, wrapping tightly around his body until he was enclosed in a sealed suit of vine armor. With a flick of his wrist, the cuff of vine armor reformed into a tapered point, thrust forward like an awl, and emitted a sharp crack. Minerva, Sprout leaned toward McGonagall, incredulous. Do you teach this to first years now? Of course not. McGonagall's usual sternness had melted into excitement. He discovered it himself. My only help was a suggestion, to borrow the theory of transubstantial transfiguration from Madame Pince. I suspected he might be able to do something remarkable with it. As the transfiguration professor, McGonagall understood better than anyone how extraordinary Vizette's feat truly was. Hogwarts taught many magical disciplines, and transfiguration was among the most exacting. Lessons progressed carefully from simple tasks to the exceedingly difficult. First years might be expected to turn a match into a needle or iron into a file, or perhaps a feather into a fan, basic intra-species transfiguration of inanimate objects. Later, students learned to change living things into other forms, and only by the fourth year would they approach more advanced techniques, never involving mutual transformation of magical creatures. Any creature with inherent magic possesses a degree of resistance to such spells. For a first year to transfigure a magical creature, that bordered on fantasy. And Vizette had done it with no direct instruction, relying on his observation of a Christmas cactus and Devil's Snare, and his study of the theory of transubstantial transfiguration, essentially teaching himself. McGonagall had never imagined such a thing could happen. Even more startling, from Vizette's description, she suspected that his magic eye had begun to develop. That was an ancient kind of perception that could not be given by others. It had to be cultivated from within. Developing a magic eye at an early age opened the way to deeper insight into magic secrets, and those who began early often went on to leave their names in the history of magic. Dueling champion Alberta Toothill, giant hunter Gifford Allerton, sea serpent slayer Glamour Peaks, and the like. Vizette relaxed the wand, and the Devil's Snare slowly contracted back into its original Christmas cactus form. He landed lightly and pointed at the cactus, excitement bubbling in his voice. Professor McGonagall, this is the transfiguration technique I've understood. That's extraordinary. Sprout clapped, beaming. McGonagall examined the cactus closely. The Christmas cactus hasn't changed. Sprout frowned. Minerva, what do you mean? It hasn't changed. Having devoted her life to herbology, Sprout didn't immediately grasp McGonagall's deeper meaning. McGonagall took a breath. Yes, Vizette said proudly, as if reading her mind. Its essence hasn't changed. I only applied magic beyond its essence. He looked at the gently swaying plant and searched for the words. It's like putting on clothes. The person is still the same person, but a different outfit changes how others see them. I put Devil's Snare's clothing onto the Christmas cactus, so it appeared to be Devil's Snare. But take the clothing off, and it's a Christmas cactus again. Vizette, I understand, McGonagall said, trying to steady her voice. You are undoubtedly the most talented student I have ever encountered. Vizette's cheeks flushed. I still have so much to learn, and Professor Sprout has been kind enough to help. And I was fortunate to be studying Devil's Snare today and to notice the connection between it and the Christmas cactus, Sprout added. You were fortunate indeed, McGonagall agreed. Talent is encountered, not sought, and luck plays its part. What mattered most was that Vizette could use that luck to learn and improve. He slid the notebook page back in and prepared to thank the professors and head for the Great Hall. After a day of excitement, his stomach was growling. He turned off the enhancements of Guardian Meditation and Magic Eye, and the world immediately snapped back to its familiar appearance. For a moment afterward, however, the room tilted. The professors at his side seemed to spin. Before he could react, he felt his legs give way. In the instant before the world went black, he heard McGonagall and Sprout cry out and felt himself sink against a soft cushion behind him. 72. Weekend at the school hospital. When Vizette opened his eyes, he was in the hospital wing. It did not smell like the antiseptic of Muggles' hospitals. Instead, the air held a muddled, herbal scent, a faint lavender note lingering at the tip of his nose. Sunlight slanted through the window and warmed the sheets. Bright sunlight. Hospital wing? He remembered collapsing just as the sun had set. Now it was afternoon. He must have been out for almost a full day. Professor Quirrell's lecture. He tried to sit up and was stopped by a gentle, unseen force. A dull, throbbing ache circled his forehead, the same worn-out feeling you get after pulling 2 all-nighters to finish exam papers. "Child, you're awake." A lined, familiar face loomed over him. Madame Pomfrey helped him sit up and handed him a measuring cup from which a thin silver steam rose. "Does your head still hurt? Drink this." Vizette pressed his fingers to his temples. The pain tightened when he moved. "Thank you, Madame Pomfrey," he managed. "To end up here from overthinking," she muttered. "I can understand it in 5th and 7th years. But you're a first year. As a Ravenclaw, are you putting too much pressure on yourself? Relax a little. There are 7 years after all." "Didn't we meet before? I told you not to use the baffling brain elixir," she went on. "You didn't take it, did you? You mustn't become dependent." "Of course not." Vizette shook his head and accepted the cup. The potion had no distinct taste at first, only a thick, porridge-like texture as it went down, then a wash of lavender fragrance and tiny rustling particles sliding into his throat. "All right, lie down and rest," Madame Pomfrey instructed. The potion worked fast. Less than 3 seconds after swallowing, as he lay back, the dull ache eased and drowsiness crept in. He slipped back into sleep. When he woke again, the sunlight was the same. Doing the maths in his head, he realized 2 days had probably passed. He had missed Quirrell's lecture, and Snape's as well. He felt a flutter of guilt. He wanted to know how Quirrell was, and he didn't want to miss any more lessons. His roommates were the first to come by, clamoring around Madame Pomfrey and asking frantic questions. Did he still have after effects from the troll? Was he going to be all right? Madame Pomfrey answered patiently at first, then, having had enough, shooed them out, saying, "The patient needs rest." Penelope and members of the Quidditch team tried the same tactic and were shown the door after a few words. Harry, Ron, and Hermione also came, but under Madame Pomfrey's steely gaze, they could only whisper 3 short questions. George and the others said, "You got hit by a troll. That's why your head hurts, right?" Ron asked. Vizette rubbed his temples. No wonder his roommates had been so anxious. Hermione's cheeks were flushed. "Thank you for talking to them for me. If it wasn't for you, Ron, Harry and I wouldn't even be friends," she said. Harry opened his mouth to answer, but Madame Pomfrey cut him off. "You can leave." "I haven't said a word," Harry protested. Madame Pomfrey raised an eyebrow. "The patient needs rest, and you've already said 1 word. That makes 3. Harry's indignant, "Ah!" was all the reply before they were shepherded out. Vizette ate something light, pumpkin oatmeal and a small stew. On the table were several waxed paper parcels with candy, cake, biscuits, and dried meat. A small silver object emitted a wispy lavender-scented smoke. "The snacks are from some first-year Hufflepuffs," Madame Pomfrey said. "You seem popular. And that silver thing was sent by Professor Quirrell," she added. "He said to light it. It helps with headaches." "Snape inspected it and added a little lavender oil before I was to light it," she finished. Professor Snape himself slid in then, silent as always, carrying a cup of the same steaming potion Vizette had been given. Vizette noticed Snape's gait was oddly stilted, but there was no time to study it. Snape glanced at him, pursed his lips, and left without a word. Vizette reached for his notebook on the bedside table. "Please rest," Madame Pomfrey said, a little exasperated. "Your diligence, most Ravenclaws don't match it." "Sorry, Madame Pomfrey, I need to write down the formula for this potion," Vizette said. He tipped the cup to his lips and took a small sip. This scent is lavender, but I can't tell if it's a tincture or an essential oil. Let me take another sip. It should be a tincture. The alcohol would evaporate during brewing. That came an involuntary reply from somewhere, Madame Pomfrey, perhaps, or his own memory. Vizette's mind was already applying Snape's methods. Taste, texture, the way the potion settled. Those sparkly particles, moonstone powder, he murmured. The thickness, moon petal nectar with mugwort infusion, a touch of sweetness. He wrote as the cup emptied, forcing his eyelids open to finish the last stroke of the formula. The more he drank, the heavier his lids became. At last, he surrendered to sleep. Madame Pomfrey was distressed. After she closed and sealed the hospital wing's door, she marched straight to Snape's office. Snape frowned the moment he saw her. Is there a problem with the potion? Impossible. Are you putting too much pressure on that child? Madame Pomfrey demanded. As soon as you left, he started taking notes. Taking notes? Snape looked surprised. What notes? Why are you bringing this to me? He was tasting the potion and deducing the formula. Did you give him homework? Deducing the formula? Snape's eyelid twitched. So what if he is? That's what a student should do. But he's a patient, Madame Pomfrey protested. She was usually gentle, but when a patient's welfare was at stake, she could be fiercest of all. Snape said flatly, Fine, I'll brew more of the potion. I'll keep making it until he's well. Madame Pomfrey pushed back at that and went away, and Snape, alone in his office, shook his head and muttered, That boy! In a dim, unfamiliar storage room, Dumbledore picked his way through an assortment of clutter. He pressed on to the furthest corner and found a huge object draped in a gray cloth. With a swift motion, he yanked the cloth away. Dust exploded into the air. Nox! He flicked his wand, and the dust vanished. The gray cloth, too, brightened under his magic until it was pure white again. What a useful charm, he murmured, smiling slightly as he turned to the object. It was an imposing mirror, at least 2 meters tall, its top nearly brushing the ceiling. A line of flowing script was carved across the top. Erisid straru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. An elaborate serpentine relief formed a golden frame, and 2 arched serpent statues supported the base, holding the mirror steady. He stood there a long while, but never moved to look directly into it. Instead, he trailed his fingers over the carved frame, a reminiscent light in his eyes. A great ball of light swelled behind him and congealed into a silver-white hippogriff patronus that hovered before the mirror. Dumbledore regarded it and asked softly, Newt, any news? The hippogriff hovered in the air and answered in an old, weary voice. Headmaster Dumbledore, you remember well, I did keep an Obscurus once. But when I traveled to New York, it was seized by the Magical Congress of the United States of America. After that incident, I sought to retrieve it, but the Congress told me the Obscurus was gone. If I am not mistaken, I fear it was taken by Gellert Grindelwald. I could not help you further, and I am sorry I cannot be of more use. With those words, the hippogriff shimmered, merged into the air like a ripple, and vanished. So that's how it is. Dumbledore watched the dim silver spread disappear, 1,000 thoughts collapsing into a long, quiet sigh. Vizette slept until evening and woke with the dull headache finally gone. 2 boys who looked very much alike were standing over him. Fred grinned. Our dear materials consultant, how are you feeling? Vizette smiled. I'd feel a lot better if you lot stopped spreading rumors about me. How is that spreading rumors? George waved a teasing finger. We're extolling the glorious deeds of our Savior, like medieval bards. Exactly, Fred nodded. Since you can still joke, you must be getting better, right? It's still the weekend, isn't it? Vizette shook his head, and a faint click-clack sounded from his neck. Yes. George's tone turned rueful. You've wasted such a splendid weekend in the hospital wing. Sleeping like this now and then isn't the worst thing, Vizette said, stretching in bed. Professor Flitwick told me to combine work with rest. Fred stroked his chin and pretended to be convinced. When it comes from your mouth, it's especially persuasive. Footsteps approached. Fred and George straightened, waved at Vizette, and called, We should go. See you in the Great Hall tomorrow. Hope so, Vizette waved back. Goodbye. The footsteps belonged to Madame Pomfrey, making her rounds. She paused at the door, satisfied that nothing required her attention, and left, locking it behind her. Once the corridor was empty, Vizette opened his eyes. He activated his magic eye to take stock of the hospital wing. Lumos. As he had suspected, the ward was steeped in ancient magic. Under ordinary circumstances, getting inside the hospital wing wasn't easy. Madame Pomfrey typically dealt with matters outside the door. Only patients were meant to enter. Seizing the rare opportunity, Vizette moved through the ward, exploring every corner. He let his magic eye map the space in his mind, lighting up each area until the entire plan of the ward glowed for him. He absorbed the ambient ancient magic power, then set about enhancing his transfiguration. He had been experimenting, changing a Christmas cactus into a devil's snare, and thought it worthwhile to invest ancient magic into that transfiguration to see what traits it would confer when improved. He did not hesitate. Gathering all the ancient magic he'd just collected, he poured it into the transfiguration. The wizard's practical guide began to flip its pages of its own accord. From the page that turned up, he drew a deeper comprehension of transfiguration, insights he could only just grasp, aided by the theory of altered transfiguration. After what felt like an age, the page revealed a new enchantment. Ancient magic self-shaping, devil's snare form. Channel ancient magic into a transfiguration. Transform fingers into devil's snare. With that understanding, Vizette didn't bother to raise his wand. He extended his hand and spoke aloud. Vine shaping. Silver blue light braided around his fingers. A prickling itch crawled from his fingertips up through his arms as his slender fingers lengthened and the bones within them seemed to soften. It was an uncanny sensation. The will of his hand felt as if it had become autonomous, while his physical hand felt malleable, like Play-Doh. He guided the magic. His fingers unfurled into dark green vines patterned with subtle plant markings. Nox! He snuffed the light at his wand tip and closed his eyes, then walked the ward with steady, measured steps. He moved as if he already knew every obstacle. He avoided beds and herb cabinets with effortless accuracy. It was a strange experience. Though his eyes were closed and darkness surrounded him, he could see the room through his transformed hand. Devil's snare, a plant that dwells in damp, dark places, has an acute perception of shadow. By taking on its form, Vizette had gained those sensory abilities. He thought of the animagus and how becoming an animal grants corresponding senses. In this transfiguration, he had become something plant-like that could perceive the dark. Then suddenly, he sensed a brightness ahead. A ball of fire flared into being out of thin air. I've said it many times, you won't get extra points for Ravenclaw. The soul shapes the magic one excels at. Take Professor Flitwick. Do you know he was once a dueling champion? A dueling champion? Vizette's eyes widened. He didn't know what that title implied, but it sounded impressive. During duels, most would resort to using dark arts. Flitwick did not. He won with exquisite charms. Dumbledore continued. The sooner someone forms their own understanding of magic, the sooner they know what their soul seeks, like Professor Flitwick, or Professor Sprout, or Professor McGonagall, or Professor Snape. They each have their own grasp of magic, which lets them use their talents most effectively. Some may be brilliant at Expelliarmus, others at memory charms. Some can even perform wandless magic. The soul is marvelous. There are as many kinds of souls as there are wizards, and as many talents as there are souls. It's rather like Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Each one brings a new sensation. This is not something that can be fully taught. A professor can only guide, inspire you to feel your soul, and construct your own understanding of magic. Vizette ventured. Headmaster, do you think my soul leans toward transfiguration? Dumbledore nodded. Yes, not only because of what you've done tonight. The Obscurus you carry is another reason I think so. Obscurus? Vizette pressed a hand to his chest. Shouldn't that mean I'm more inclined to the dark arts? Not necessarily, Dumbledore countered with a smile. A soul is neither simple nor fixed. No one is limited to a single inclination. You can be strong at Expelliarmus and also master the difficult Patronus charm. Anything is possible. Wizards can create miracles. He tapped his wand lightly. An Obscurus is tied to dark power, yes, but it is more than simply dark magic. Dumbledore drew his wand and waved it gently. A thin wisp of black mist rose from the tip, sometimes billowing like a dark cloud, at other times condensing into a sharp, almost metallic point. 75. Notes of Dumbledore and Grindelwald. After the demonstration, Dumbledore lowered his wand and the black mist dissolved into nothing. His voice was quiet. Obscurials are extremely malleable, but also wildly unpredictable. Most people only notice their uncontrollability. But they forget an Obscurial's talent for transfiguration, Vizette said. Being able to control such power, shrinking it, expanding it at will, isn't that part of it? Vizette nodded blankly, still trying to follow. He knew Dumbledore's skill in transfiguration was profound. Without Dumbledore's annotations, transfiguration theory would have been much harder for him to understand. Dumbledore smiled gently. Think of it as a conversation. This is simply my perspective, built from my knowledge, my experience, and everything I've lived through. You're different from me, Dumbledore continued. You have a gift that lets you understand magic more efficiently. A gift? Vizette frowned, puzzled. Your eyes, the magic eye, it's an ancient and rare talent. Dumbledore nodded. Vizette's eyelids twitched. Headmaster Dumbledore, did Mr. Ollivander tell you? He did, Dumbledore said. He wanted it kept secret, so he came to me. He rolled up his sleeve to the elbow and clenched his fist. 3 thin, chain-like lines appeared on his forearm, gleaming and crackling like tiny fireworks. Vizette swallowed. Is that a magical contract? Dumbledore's smile deepened. Yes, the unbreakable vow, an exceptionally powerful binding. The unbreakable vow? Vizette echoed. He had suspected a contract when Dumbledore mentioned secrecy, but didn't know the details. He asked, careful, so it can't be broken? In a sense, no, Dumbledore said. If someone breaks the vow, they die. Vizette gasped. That's terrifyingly strict, but it does keep things safe. Why would you make such a dangerous contract? Vizette asked. Ollivander values your gift, Dumbledore explained. When he told me, I was as surprised as anyone. He wanted to ensure no one learned of it, so he bound himself to me. The vow is simple. Neither of us will reveal anything about your magic eye. Vizette felt unexpectedly moved. He had met Ollivander only once, yet the wandmaker had taken extraordinary measures on his behalf. Dumbledore noticed the change and smiled. Wand-making doesn't happen overnight. It's an extension of alchemy and needs a wide foundation of knowledge. You should make time to enjoy the magical world as well. If you end up in the hospital again, Madame Pomfrey will be on my back. Vizette thought of transfiguration theory, smiled, and nodded. Mr. Ollivander told me the same thing. All right, no more worrying, Dumbledore said, patting Vizette's shoulder. He produced 2 lemon sherbets from his robe, handed one to Vizette, unwrapped his own, and popped it into his mouth. There's another reason I wanted to speak with you. Your eyes are unique, and something occurred to me that might suit you." He reached into his pocket and produced a worn notebook. On its cover was a distinctive symbol, a circle set inside a triangle, with a straight line pressing against the triangle's apex and piercing the circle. Vizette took the book and noticed two signatures beneath the symbol, Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald. He traced the emblem with his finger. "Is this yours and Grindelwald's notebook?" Dumbledore nodded and winked. "Yes, it's a private thing. I'd like you to keep it for me." Vizette cleared his throat, suppressing the flutter of curiosity and something else, an awareness of the unusual connection between Dumbledore and Grindelwald. He had some knowledge of their relationship from Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, but he had not expected them to have shared notes and research. Dumbledore's expression softened. Grindelwald's eyes were remarkable. Not the magic eye exactly, but rare nonetheless. "He possessed what he called heavenly eyes," Dumbledore said. "He could foresee, with uncanny clarity, the actions an opponent would take. He and I became, for a time, consumed with developing that sight. We recorded a great deal of theory and, if you'll forgive the phrase, magical traces in that book." "Will it be too dangerous to have?" Vizette asked. "And the names? How should I hide them?" "Good child," Dumbledore said kindly. "I will give it an extra layer of protection." He took the notebook back, drew his wand, and made a few deliberate gestures, as if writing invisible spells across the cover. When he closed the book and handed it back, Vizette felt a warmth run through his palm. A gentle glow wrapped the notebook in a soft sphere of light, comforting and secure. Amid the glow, the notebook seemed to come alive, slipping up Vizette's arm and coiling onto his wrist like a small, winding serpent. When the light faded, a silver bracelet lay there. Vizette turned his wrist over and over, inspecting it. A phoenix had been worked into the metal in fine relief. The slightly dulled silver had an ancient feel to it, as if the bracelet had a history. "Headmaster Dumbledore is this. You can try flipping your wrist and saying, 'Open,'" Dumbledore suggested. Vizette did as he was told. In an instant, the bracelet shifted back into the notebook, lying quietly in his palm. "That's incredible," he said. "Headmaster Dumbledore, is this transfiguration?" Dumbledore smiled and waved a hand. "Not only transfiguration. There's some basic alchemy in there as well. It's something he and I worked on when we were young." He tapped the notebook. "I've written the method to make this bracelet in the notes." "I see it," Vizette exclaimed, spotting a newly added section. The handwriting there was darker and heavier, a strong contrast to the elegant flowing script that surrounded it. "You must be very fond of it," Dumbledore observed with a smile. "I've written everything down, from the first sketch to the final form. Consider it extracurricular reading. Take your time with it." A new week began, and Hogwarts had turned to winter overnight. It wasn't only colder. Heavy snow fell, and the gray mountains that ringed the school were dusted white. When the sun struck them, the slopes glowed, no longer bleak but warm and lustrous like Hedian jade. The lake beside the castle froze into a thick sheet of ice, as clear and hard as glass, reflecting a strange, submerged world. Talk about the troll hadn't died down, especially after Professor McGonagall had sent Vizette to the hospital wing. The students found it hard to believe that a first year could handle a troll. If Harry had done it, no one would have been surprised. Harry wasn't just the boy who lived. Many saw him as a savior. For someone believed to have faced Voldemort as a baby, defeating a troll seemed perfectly reasonable. So a crowd of curious students trailed Vizette to the library. They didn't read, they just stared, and they kept at it until Vizette felt too on edge to study there. He tried the Ravenclaw common room, but everyone else thought it a good spot too, and it was usually crowded. His dormitory was quieter, but he sometimes needed to practice magic, and he didn't want to attract attention. Fred and George's secret workshop was tempting, but cramped. Their experiments usually set off small accidents. In the end, Vizette chose Hagrid's hut. Hagrid's hut was warm from a fire of real wood, and once Vizette had spent a little time there, Fang would flop down in front of him and let Vizette scratch his belly. Hagrid, who looked all rough edges and kindness, liked making little things. He would sit whittling wooden flutes with a pocket knife. Vizette thought it looked as difficult for a giant as threading a needle. It'll pass in a few days, Hagrid said as he whittled. They'll be on to Quidditch soon enough. Vizette grinned. I heard. Arsenal told me the schedule. Gryffindor versus Slytherin in mid-November, and Ravenclaw against Hufflepuff before the holidays. They'll be too busy to follow me around. Hagrid put down the knife and rubbed his hands together. Want some tea? And a rock cake? Fresh out the oven, hot. Just tea, Vizette said. I had a big lunch. Hagrid had a peculiar talent for pushing a feature of a dish to its extreme. His rock cakes were famous for being unimaginably hard, as if the rock in their name had been literal. He was just getting up to boil water when a faint pop came from the room. A plump, fluffy bird about the size of a rooster appeared in front of the hearth. Its feathers were brightly colored, but a nasty wound near its wing oozed a dark mixture of blood and greenish fluid. It was a fleeing fowl. A magical bird, much like the dodo of Muggle records. Muggle naturalists had declared the dodo extinct, but in the wizarding world, the fleeing fowl had simply withdrawn from Muggle eyes. The creature had a peculiar talent. It could vanish from one spot and reappear somewhere else, an ability similar to apparition, but quieter, and not affected by ordinary anti-disapparition charms. Barry, how'd you get hurt? Hagrid cried, stopping the kettle so hard the water sloshed into the fireplace and steamed. He scooped the bird up and set it on the table for a closer look. You're poisoned. You'll be staying here a few days, love. Hagrid went to the wall and took down a roll of bandage made with unicorn hair. Vizette stood and said, Hagrid, can I try? If I can use magic, we might not need the bandage. Hagrid's eyes widened. You learned healing that quick? Vizette nodded. A little. Right then, give it a go, Hagrid said, handing the fleeing fowl to Vizette. Vizette didn't rush to cast a healing spell. Instead, he used what he'd learned in Snape's private lessons to examine the toxin in the Diricol first. Lumos, he whispered. A soft, sun-warm light bloomed from the tip of his wand. It wasn't the ordinary Lumos. It was a variation Snape had taught him for detecting traces of the dark arts. The Diricol shrieked in pain. The flesh around its wing quivered. Hagrid fumbled in his pockets, pulling out scraps of food and stuffing them into the bird's beak while humming, Good Barry, don't be scared. It'll be all right. Under the light, thin tendrils of black smoke rose from the trembling wound, a sure sign of dark magic. Nox, Vizette said, dispersing the glow. Hagrid, are there many dark arts-affected creatures in the Forbidden Forest? Hagrid nodded. Aye, some. More than most think. That's why the forest's off-limits. If you're found in there, you're breaking school rules. It's worse in winter, Hagrid added. When the normal animals hunker down, the nastier magical beasts get desperate and less picky about food. Two more Diricols stumbled into the hut, both in bad shape, their wounds oozing a greenish liquid. Hagrid's face went grave. He put the Diricol he'd been holding down, went to the wall and took down his umbrella, leather coat, and crossbow. Fully bundled, he pulled a small packet of food from his pocket and handed it to Vizette. I'm going to check the forest. If any more of the birds come, give 'em this. They'll trust you if you feed 'em. Hagrid left quickly, and Fang padded to the window and lay down, tail wagging, watching him disappear between the trees. More Diricols gathered in the hut, frightened, but the food Hagrid had left calmed them. Vizette took a slow breath and began treating the wounds using material processing techniques. At first, the Diricol trembled in his arms. Only after he drained the venom did it stop shaking. Its spirits lifted noticeably. He cast a levitation charm on the viscous green fluid to see it better. Wingardium Leviosa. The venom floated into the air. This looks familiar, Vizette muttered, then invoked his magic eye, the investigative charm he used to read residues and symbols. The spell revealed the telltale markings in the venom. Acromantula venom, he said, incredulous. There are acromantulas in the Forbidden Forest? Acromantulas were 5X-level dangerous creatures, native to tropical rainforests. Think deep Borneo jungles, not the cold Scottish highlands where Hogwarts stood. For them to survive the winter here and start hunting local magical fauna like Diricols suggested desperation. Diricols were quick and hard to catch. Acromantulas were brutal hunters. According to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, many acromantulas had once been bred by wizards to guard estates. Artificial breeding could create unusually vicious specimens, some even known to hunt humans. They spun incredibly strong webs and produced a potent venom prized in potion making, a key ingredient in certain invisibility draughts, a neutralizer for armadillo bile, turning a dangerously corrosive substance into a usable potion ingredient for things like wit-sharpening potions, and, when diluted, an enhancer for other brews. Snape had once told Vizette the finest acromantula venom could fetch 100 galleons per pint, roughly 550 milliliters, about the size of a Screaming Seas bottle. Venom dried quickly after an acromantula's death. It had to be harvested while the creature was still dying, which was why collectors took such risks and why the stuff was expensive. Vizette managed to collect about 50 milliliters from the Diracal's wound, though it was bloodied and thus lower quality. He tried to heal the Diracal. Episki. A green light sprinkled over the torn flesh. The exposed tissue twitched as the spell tried to close it. But just as the wound began to knit, a wisp of black smoke rose from the flesh and snuffed out the healing's effect. Vizette frowned. After months of study, he'd become good at telling magic apart. No wonder they're rated 5X, he whispered. The smoke wasn't just venom, it was a hidden hex layered over the injury. Then we'll try something older. He drew an S shape in the air with his wand. Scourgify. A gust washed over the Diracal. It didn't shy away, it trusted him, and the scouring charm stripped the dark hex clean off. When the wound was finally free of interference, Vizette finished the healing. It felt satisfying to turn so much theory into results. With its wing mended, the Diracal brightened. It curiously poked its beak against Vizette's arm and then joined the others, darting and flickering in and out of sight as they played. Vizette kept his magic eye active and watched, fascinated. The Diracal's magical circuits actually shifted when they phased in and out. He pulled out his notebook and recorded everything, the exact pattern of their magic, the timing, every variation he could find. Though he didn't push the analysis further in that moment, preferring to get a full record first. Hagrid returned, snow shaking from his shoulders. Looks like they like you, he said, a relieved smile in his voice. Glad you're back safe, Vizette said, stowing his notebook. There are acromantulas in the Forbidden Forest. These Diracals were attacked by them. Panic flickered across Hagrid's face. How do you know it was acromantulas that did this? 78. The Hissing Curse. I've cured the Diracal. Vizette pulled a small vial of venom from his pocket. I've seen acromantula venom before, so I recognized it. Oh, so that's it. Hagrid breathed a huge sigh of relief, forcing a smile to change the subject. You really cured the Diracal. That's brilliant. After returning from the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid still looked unsettled. His face wore an anxious expression, and his eyes were shadowed. He had no interest in the acromantula venom and told Vizette to keep it. The Forbidden Forest was never peaceful. Hagrid often went deep in and came back with injured magical creatures, asking Vizette to help heal them. Vizette never refused. The healing work meant he could keep gathering acromantula venom while he worked, a useful 2-for-1. Besides the venom, Hagrid gave him a packet of unicorn hair bandages as payment for his help. Didn't we agree before? Hagrid pushed the bandages back toward Vizette. You help me with the creature's injuries, and I'll give you bandages. Even if I use the bandages, they'll still need days to recover, Vizette protested. Your healing magic is far better. Just take them. Vizette spent the next week buried in study and practice. There was simply too much to learn. The Diracal's magical circuit, Dumbledore and Grindelwald's notes, review material on compound magic, Quidditch training. He constantly felt pressed for time, wishing he could somehow split time into pieces to use. He also needed to revise and polish his draft about the Halloween troll for submission before the Christmas holidays. Before he knew it, the weekend arrived, and it was time for his arranged meeting with Professor Quirrell. Acting as if nothing had happened was easy to say and hard to do. Vizette arrived half an hour early and paced the landing for a long while, steadying himself before going in to face Quirrell alone. He placed the silver object on the table and said plainly, Professor Quirrell, thank you for your help. Quirrell answered briefly, his tone cool. Vizette noticed Quirrell looked worse than usual, very pale, the whites of his eyes reddened, sweat beading on his brow. It was clear he was under stress. Professor, you don't look well, Vizette said as he usually would. Maybe you should see Madame Pomfrey? No need. Quirrell forced a tight, ugly smile. It's probably just the cold. I haven't adjusted yet. Sit down. Let's begin. He breathed out, avoiding Vizette's eyes. We'll learn a more complex compound curse, the Hanging Scream Curse. The Hanging Scream Curse could be cast directly with a long incantation or bound into objects as a trap. Opals were especially good vessels. They could release the curse's full effect. To demonstrate, Quirrell had prepared an opal pendant. He fastened it to a venomous snake. The instant the opal touched the snake's belly, the creature went limp, as if unconscious. Then it floated into the air, emitting heart-wrenching hisses while its body twisted and writhed. After about 5 minutes, the snake was hanged to death, its struggles fading until it lay still. The creature's dying experience matched the name of the spell perfectly: Hanging Scream. Vizette felt a cold shiver at the cruel ending. Quirrell's own condition worsened as he spoke, beads of sweat on his forehead, veins standing out at his temples as though he were in pain. He steeled himself and forced his voice onward. As you can see, this compound charm has several effects. First, it induces unconsciousness. Then it causes the victim to levitate, screaming unconsciously, until the victim is tortured to death. He faltered and his face drained further. Professor, do we really need to learn curses? Vizette asked quietly. The curse of exhaustion was already a lot. You've told me before I'm not suited for curses. Yes, I did tell you that. Quirrell nodded, pausing as if gathering strength. But dark arts are one form of magic, and they're what I know best. Doesn't it use the levitation charm? Vizette pressed. The Hanging Scream's levitation effect. Doesn't that involve the levitation charm? This compound uses extended incantations of the levitation charm, extended forms of stupefy, extended forms of petrificus talus. Quirrell finally found his rhythm and spoke more clearly, analyzing the curse in detail. If one ignored how ill he looked, the lesson itself was brilliant. The discussion of extended forms of the levitation charm opened new insights for Vizette. It deepened his understanding and added a new chapter to his private notes, the Wizard's Practical Guide. He made a mental note. Ancient magic, levitation charm, incantation, laviosa, a channeling of ancient power to reinforce the levitation charm, boosting strength enough to lift larger creatures. This ancient form resembled the improved summoning charm. Both could affect living beings. Compared to the long, conventional incantation for levitation, the ancient version was more concise and potent. More importantly, Vizette realized he hadn't expended any ancient magic power to learn this ancient application. It had simply become clear to him through the lesson. When the sun had set, Quirrell's effort had clearly drained him. He slumped back in his chair, exhausted. Vizette's concern returned. Professor, are you really all right? Should I take you to the hospital wing? No. Quirrell refused again, weak but adamant. I'll eat something and I'll be fine. You should go, quickly. Vizette nodded. Professor, thank you. At the door, he paused, turned, and left a chocolate frog on the desk. Quirrell's face was a paper-white mask of pain. He noticed the chocolate frog, clenched his jaw, and with a sudden, determined wave of his hand, like a man forcing himself to keep control, said through his teeth, Go! Quirrell was the only person left in the office. He started, hands flying to the back of his head, his face twisting in a look of pain. He cast a quick ward on the door and then tore the cloth from his face. Isn't that right? Came Voldemort's hoarse, rasping laugh from the mirror. Do everything I tell you. Show him the Hanging Scream curse, and then ease him into learning the magic. Quirrell, I expect you to remain obedient. Quirrell watched the distorted reflection of Lord Voldemort out of the corner of his eye. The sight of that grotesque face sent a cold shiver through him. Of course, my lord. He stared at the chocolate frogs on the table, voice tight. I will follow your commands until you regain your strength. That's good. There was triumph in Voldemort's tone. About the obstacles beyond that room, and that Cerberus, have you found a way through? There's a lead. Quirrell shivered, answering in a small voice. Professor Sprout must have left Devil's Snare. As for the Cerberus, I asked Professor Kettleburn. He doesn't know how to handle it. There's such a thing? Voldemort murmured. If even the care of magical creatures professor doesn't know how to get past a Cerberus, then find someone who does. Quirrell hurried. My lord, do you have someone in mind? That gamekeeper, Rubus Hagrid. Voldemort's face derided the suggestion. His head is full of knowledge about monstrous creatures. Get close to him. He's not tight-lipped. A little prompting, and he'll tell you the Cerberus's weakness. This, Quirrell looked troubled. You seem very familiar with him. How should I approach Hagrid? His habits are revolting. Voldemort's disgust was plain. He likes huge, ugly creatures. First, find him an extremely exotic, rare creature cub. Then give him a good deal of strong drink, and he'll spill everything. Will that really work? Quirrell's voice trembled. And such rare cubs aren't cheap. Quirrell, are you being disobedient again? Voldemort's grin was menacing. I've put the plan in your mouth. Aren't you going to execute it? Understood. Quirrell hastened to placate him. I will do my utmost to complete this task. Sunday afternoon was time for Snape's private lessons. The potions office felt unusually empty. No baskets of bloody materials to dissect. No bundles of herbs to sort. A table stood in the center, a cauldron at its place, scales and processing tools set out, dozens of potion ingredients laid out in neat rows. Vizette looked at the ingredients and felt a wave of recognition. Snape sat to the side, lifted his chin, and nodded toward the table. Begin. Vizette acknowledged him and moved to the cauldron. He started identifying the ingredients methodically. The notes from that night had not been wasted. He had recorded the recipe and left only what was necessary. He muttered the invocations as he worked, then created a small containment field with the spell Cold Air and Water, putting the unused materials into it with careful hands. Once everything was tidied away, he returned to the table and began. Tell me their uses, Snape said, arms crossed, and how to process them. All right. Vizette picked up a handful of flowers and herbs and spoke clearly. Lavender must be made into a tincture. Chop the flowers and leaves finely, then steep them in alcohol. The soaking time depends on the intended concentration. Generally, steep in a cool place for 4 to 6 weeks, shaking regularly to ensure full extraction. Remove the solids with a summoning charm, then filter 3 times to eliminate impurities. Store the finished tincture in a cool, dark place. Snape's tone was cold. Filtering 3 times is your operation? 1 summoning charm is enough to remove the solids. Yes, I still have much to learn. My magical control needs improvement. Vizette answered smoothly and moved on to the next jar, this one covered in black cloth. Moon dew honey. Collect it at night, ideally on a clear full moon. Avoid direct sunlight when you use it. Moonstone should be ground on a clear full moon night to maximize its potency. Mugwort is made into an infusion similar to a tincture, but it requires the use of morning dew. He worked through the list in orderly detail. Snape listened without speaking, though his right knee gave a small, occasional tremor. From Vizette's experience with Snape, silence usually meant approval, so he continued without pause. Rote memorization, very fitting for a Ravenclaw, Snape said at last, putting his gloved hands down. His voice was low. That you can explain things to this degree means those ingredients were not memorized in vain. But it's only the basics. Even a troll, given enough training, can guard a vault. If a supposed potioneer only imitates, I suggest they find another profession. The troll metaphor was characteristically Snape, and Vizette accepted it. He had learned to hear the key points in Snape's barbs. Professor Snape, do I still need to process the materials then? Of course. Snape's expression remained unreadable. You have only managed to stop lugging the troll's cudgel. You still must process the materials themselves. The potion you took in the hospital wing is called the soul-soothing potion. It is a high-level brew designed to deeply calm the mind and repair damage to the soul. Vizette felt his spirits lift. This was not the dry textbook-level description. This was the kind of theoretical depth he had longed for. He had heard fragments of this before, but never explained so systematically. He tried to absorb the concepts Snape hinted at, forming a picture of potion theory beyond mere recipes. A true potion master understands how technique, timing, and substitutions can preserve a potion's quality even when an ingredient is altered or missing. 80. Stay alert. Vizette had always thought of potions as a precise science. Handle the ingredients properly, follow a standardized technique, and you could produce a high-quality potion. Snape taught him otherwise. To Snape, adding a little more or a little less of an ingredient could steer a potion toward the effect he wanted. For most witches and wizards, potion making was like a jigsaw puzzle. Every piece needed to fit exactly to complete the picture. For Snape, ingredients were building blocks. As long as he could assemble the desired shape in the end, it didn't matter which blocks he used. The difference between an ordinary potioneer and a master brewer couldn't have been starker. Snape's private lessons mirrored his method of handling ingredients: spare, precise, and mercilessly concise. His directions were powerful but condensed. Vizette had to make associations and take notes at the same time, just to keep up. The soul-soothing potion they were studying was advanced, and he worked hard to record the key points. The lesson finally ended at sunset. Vizette rubbed his forehead and felt dizzy. Too much new knowledge had been fed in at once, and he would need time and practice to truly understand it. He told himself, roughly, only because he believed theory alone wasn't enough. Practice had to make the theory his. "Next week, we continue," Snape said, rising automatically. He straightened, then faltered forward. A faint tang of blood hung in the air. "Professor Snape," Vizette jumped up and rushed to support him. "I wanted to ask you earlier." "I'm injured." Snape's face tightened, sweat beading at his temple. "Go back to your common room." "Potions can't fix this?" Vizette asked, still half in the lesson. "If healing charms can't work, potions are usually the answer." Snape's mouth thinned. The words echoed what they had just been discussing. "I was bitten by a dangerous magical creature," he said. "Its venom and a kind of malevolence are intertwined. That combination makes the wound difficult to treat. The creature is rare. There's no recorded antidote for its particular malice." "Like counter curses," he went on. "When you face unfamiliar malevolence and you lack a specific counter, you must use potions to gradually decipher and dispel it." He drew back his robes to show a bleeding calf. "I haven't found a direct antidote yet. It's as simple as that." "May I try?" Vizette asked, alarmed. "Lately, I've been helping Hagrid, doing a lot of cleaning up after things touched by the dark arts." "If you want to try, you have 3 minutes," Snape said, voice sharpening. For a moment, his annoyance shifted to a private irritation. He'd recently altered an antidote formula and gone to Filch to change the dressing, only to encounter Harry in the caretaker's office and forget to deduct points. The memory made him mutter under his breath, "Gryffindor, 10 points." Vizette blinked at the sudden point deduction and the Gryffindor target, baffled, but he did not hesitate. He drew his wand and traced an S in the air, casting the cleansing and soul-purging charm. A vortex rose and swirled around Snape's calf, gradually turning black as it drew out a dense mass of malevolence. When the vortex dissipated, the taint hovered in the air like a dark, breathing balloon. Snape's expression eased. He flicked his wand and ingredients flew from the cabinets as if summoned by an invisible conductor. With precise little motions, he directed them to process in midair. Strobing lights of magic danced as components combined. Vizette watched, dazzled. Every movement mattered, and there was no obvious place to look first. Scents tangled. The cauldron steamed with fish-eyed bubbles, and with another wave, the potion gathered into a ball, condensed into a fist-sized salve and drifted to the wound. Snape had not moved a step. His wand alone completed the brewing. He looked casual, almost bored, as if reading a book. The salve settled on the bite, and a green smoke rose. The bleeding closed, and the tissue knitted together. Then, Snape turned to the floating malevolence, drew a careless circle, and conjured a transparent glass-like dome to enclose it. "Don't show off the visual effects of your magic," he said flatly, looking at Vizette. "There are always people with ulterior motives." "The wizarding world isn't as lovely as you think," he went on. "Outside these walls you must be wary. Don't trust easily if you want to survive." Vizette felt as if someone had struck his chest. He stammered, "I understand. Thank you, Professor." Snape's warning stuck with him. Hogwarts life was beautiful, and it had made him complacent. Snape's reminder and the memory of the rune spore he'd encountered before arriving at school were proof that malice existed beyond the grounds. The Daily Prophet's reports of Voldemort's potential return and of other dark wizards who used magic to reduce the cost of crime made his resolve harden. If someone coveted the cleansing and soul-purging charm and wanted to capture him for study, or if they threatened Luna or Xenophilius, he thought, then he would be failing them if he wasn't ready. "I don't want you to die and come back as a ghost at Hogwarts," Snape said quietly. Understood, Professor, Vizette replied. Snape added, expressionless, some things can wait until Madame Pomfrey leaves, like judging potion raw materials. He paused, then looked at Vizette with the same cold curiosity. I still don't know why you resisted the potion's effects and were able to finish writing the formula. Vizette's face flushed. He finally understood Snape's incredulity. The odd comparison to a patriarch tapping Sun Wukong on the head, a method, he supposed, that suited legendary figures more than himself, made him smile inwardly. Still, he decided he was not displeased by the direction things were going.